There we go. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have Linda Anderson, Sonia Banks, and Michele Owens Patterson, all doctors and teachers and writers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wanda. We really appreciate your having us. And I'm a resident of Sag Harbor. Michele, Sonia, and I have our summer retreats here, our writing retreats, whether they be on the beach or on the deck. And so we are very bonded as a result of that, and in the community in which I reside in Sag Harbor, which is a very special community. So, which has nurtured actually our work, and our work's been celebrated here in the Sag Harbor community, specifically the historically African American community. So, thank you again.
Thank you.
I would just say that I am a professor at Hostos Community College and a cross-divisional consultant at the Dalton School, and have been practicing as a clinical psychologist for many years. And I'm Sonia, how about you?
Yes, so thank you again. I'm Sonia Banks, also a clinical psychologist, child and family. I've been applying that training throughout my career in various areas, including the government and organizational fields. And currently I am the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for the Child Center of New York that was started in 1953. And I'm actually the second generation in my family to work there, so it's a privilege. I do have the opportunity to be the president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Manhattan chapter. We're focused on breaking the ceilings and the barriers to equal opportunities and work for women. So I thank you for this, and that leads into the story I'll tell after Dr. Owens talks about herself, of when and how we met. You're muted. That's my mute signal.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Michele Owens, and I'm a clinical psychologist as well. I've been in private practice for 30 years plus, with a specialization in working with women and also adolescents. I've worked with adolescents for many, many years, and I'm currently the senior psychologist at Prep for Prep, which is a premier leadership and educational organization that takes underserved students and prepares them for placement in independent schools. And then we track them and support them throughout middle school, high school, and college with the goal of developing leaders that can give back to their communities and to the world at large. I also do consultancy work with schools, churches, hospitals around issues related to diversity and inclusion, as well as relationships both at work and at home.
So I'll lead in with how we met. It was in 1998. We met as a part of an undertaking for the coalition on your relationship with yourself. We were noticing that our leaders were now going into this phase of life where you wanted to know about how to make your relationship with others better. And so I asked where I could find two exceptional psychologists that were open enough to see your understanding of yourself as being paramount to your leadership and your ability to break barriers. And that's how I was introduced to Dr. Anderson and Dr. Owens. And so we met for that conference, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your intimate other and your family, and so on and so on, and came together with this understanding that there was something as a phenomenon that we were all noticing in our practices, and we started talking about it, and it was named silent agreements. And so we started writing and studying together and came up with this book.
Okay.
Do you want me to show the cover?
Yeah, that'd be great. Just gonna share the cover with you if you haven't already seen the book or purchased the book. So this is the book. silent agreements, how to free your relationships of unspoken expectations. And just to piggyback on what Dr. Banks just said, we had known about this phenomenon for a while. We've seen it and observed it in our practices and in our work, and felt that it was really important to share it with a wider audience, because we know that not everybody is going to come in and sit in a therapist's office, and certainly not necessarily come into our offices. But we wanted to share this notion of silent agreements and how they affect people's lives, so that a larger audience of people would be aware of them, and also be able to understand how they function in their own lives and what they can do to kind of create an open space for open communication and just generally like a better life experience. So that's why we decided to share it in a book form. We worked on it very hard, and now we have the finished product, and we hope that you will enjoy the book and certainly purchase it and read it. But let's just talk for a minute about the whole concept, like what exactly are silent agreements? And I think we have another panel that asked that question. Do you have that, Wanda, that panel?
Yes.
There? Yeah. So basically, silent agreements are the unspoken, I think we covered why we decided to write about it, but silent agreements, there we go. Silent agreements are the unspoken rules of relationships, and they grow from the beliefs, the expectations, and the assumptions that we have, but that we don't talk about, and meanwhile hold others accountable to them anyway. They tend to grow from childhood and all our experiences and interactions along the way. Silent agreements often are held without us being fully aware of them. And when they match up, they can go merrily along. Everybody's happy. There's no conversation, but it's kind of silently understood that our expectations line up. For example, you might have a silent agreement with whomever you live with that I'll do the cooking and you wash the dishes. It might not be something that you've ever spoken about, but a rhythm that you've fallen into, and it's a silent agreement that everybody is happy with. Or if you have children or raised children, my daughter always studies very hard and gets good grades, so I don't ask her about her homework. It's kind of like a silent agreement that grows out of an understanding and an expectation that you both have, but just haven't vocalized it out loud. The issue that we find that's also often complicating is when silent agreements don't line up. And that's often when people run into trouble, because you proceed as if everybody is agreeing to the same expectations, what they are, who's going to fulfill them, and how they're going to fulfill them. And when these aren't spoken about out loud, people run into trouble. So an example of that would be my mother-in-law can criticize my cooking, but I can't say anything about it. That's a silent agreement in the negative sense. Like, you are both agreeing to it, but it really doesn't line up with how you're feeling internally, like what you would expect internally. Internally, you may very well expect that she won't criticize my cooking and she'll be kind of quiet. But sometimes people fall into these agreements that really don't line up with what you really genuinely feel or genuinely would hope for in the relationship. Another example would be, I won't ask for a raise and my boss won't offer me one. Again, a silent agreement that you're entered into, but it doesn't really line up with what your assumptions and your beliefs are about what you should get paid and that you should be offered a raise on a regular basis. So this is where people run into trouble, and this is why we decided to kind of begin to talk with folks about this and help them to recognize when these things happen in their own lives. So silent agreements occur between individuals and also within groups of individuals, families, co-workers, etc. But they also have a lot to do with the silent agreements you have with yourself. And so I'd like to read a very brief passage about silent agreements with yourself, and maybe this will reverberate with you a little bit. When we ask where these beliefs and expectations originate, the answer is quite often with yourself. For example, I will never settle for less than my dream partner. I will sacrifice everything for my children. My career comes first. These internal silent agreements can inform how you enter your relationships and what you expect from other people. They can also dictate the kinds of silent agreements you expect others to enter into to support your silent agreements with yourself. More importantly, they often provide a map for how you navigate the roads of your lives, the decisions you make, the jobs you accept or reject, the friendships you form, and the families you create. Your relationship with yourself is constrained when you don't recognize the expectations, assumptions, and beliefs you have about who you are, what's important to you, and why. When you're unaware of your beliefs about yourself, the silent agreements you enter into with others will be more difficult to uncover. Without this awareness, you assume that the other person has read and agreed to adhere to the same relationship rulebook. That's when you can find yourself questioning the behavior of the other person. You find yourself wondering, what the heck was he thinking? When you'd be better off asking yourself, what was I thinking? That's just like a little snippet about how we think about silent agreements, both as an internal agreement system with yourself and also when you try to exercise with other people. Before I move on, I'll let the others jump in. Just want to tell you a little bit about, give you a little example of how they begin. We call this our Sarah story. So little Sarah's home with her mom on a Saturday morning. Mom is trying to clean the house, had got a billion things to do. And Mrs. Johnson from down the block, their really nice neighbor that they like and spend time with, comes by and rings the bell. And Sarah gets ready to run to the door, and Mom says, no, don't go to the door. Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. She needs to go away. I'm too busy. I don't have time for all that talking and sitting around today. So Sarah lets it go. A couple of days later, let's just put it in the circumstances we're in now. It's COVID-19 time, and Mom and little Sarah have to go to the grocery store, and they're in the grocery store, and they're being very careful, and they're trying to avoid people in general. And then who comes down the aisle but Mrs. Johnson? Sarah says, oh, hi, Mrs. Johnson. Oh, you rang the bell the other day, but Mom said she didn't have time to talk to you. She didn't have time for all that talking that the two of you do. Her mother shoots her a look, and when she gets home, she scolds her very sternly and says, you can't do that. Why'd you tell her that? You can never say those kinds of things. And Sarah, from that incident and others that build on it, begins to internalize the notion that you really can't tell people how you feel, that you have to be careful about what you say, and particularly when it comes to not wanting to be around the other person. And we tell the story about how this plays out in her relationships as a teen with her first boyfriend, her college boyfriend, the mate she picks to marry, and all these moments in her life when she really wants to extricate herself from a relationship, but struggles to do it because the template has been laid that you can't openly express that because someone's going to be upset, or else you're going to end up being, someone's going to be angry at you, and you're going to feel ashamed. Of course, that's a mini example of where that notion might start with somebody, but we also recognize that those kinds of feelings later in life tend to have to be reinforced through various other experiences and instances in one's life. So that's where we are in terms of how we conceptualize silent agreements, and I'll turn it over to Linda.
Thanks, Michelle. I would just say that silent agreements, of course, applies across all domains in our lives. So this book focuses more on our silent agreements in our personal lives or in our work lives, but we also focus on family, silent agreements about commitment, silent agreements about money, silent agreements about sex, and silent agreements about health, as well as the workplace. So we're going to be just reading a few vignettes from a couple of these chapters. And I would just say that there are also what we call community-based silent agreements. This is tapped into with certain vignettes that we've posed in the book. I'm going to read about one of them. But I also want to say that community-based silent agreements, like what is going on in our community and in our society today, is a whole nother book that we are writing with regard to silent agreements. What is said, what is unspoken, and all of our hearts are heavy. Our wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness right now is being profoundly compromised. And many of us are feeling worn down, are feeling extreme pain and anger right now. And so all three of us are collecting, receiving a lot of the pain from the people in which we deal with. And so we also unpack silent agreements with them as well, to understand the very different mindsets that are colliding right now. I decided that I would share the story of one of the men that we feature here in the health chapter, Joe Martin Lewis. Entering middle age can be daunting, even for the most organized and optimistic person. And just to give you context about Joe, he's a survivor. He's the one that made it in his community, and the one that just worked, that put all the energy in being a symbol of pride for his community and his family. So he rose to become a vice president of a successful public relation firm. And yet every day the pressure was increasing. He'd been doing a good job of balancing the demands of being a good father, husband, company man, and at that time paid pretty good attention to his health. He'd always internalized so much responsibility for those around him and his community, and his expectations were always very, very high. At this point, however, his parents' health was breaking down in very profound ways. And on top of that, he was now having to deal with his own declining health. So he began to have difficulty sleeping, eating, concentrating, and began to realize that his mother was, in fact, diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Joe decided that the best way to manage his parents' declining health was to move his parents in with his immediate family, and so he did. With this change in his household configuration, he often had to stay up late finishing projects. As his caregiver responsibilities expanded, Joe's wife and kids began to feel that there was a growing distance between him and them. His wife said that his personality was changing, that he seemed distracted and short-tempered. Joe began to develop stomach problems so intense that pills to combat acid reflux became part of his regular diet. Then came the headaches, and then the back pain, which at times was excruciating. So what were Joe's silent agreements with himself? Well, in order to be a truly good husband, father, and son, he says, I have to take care of everyone important in my life, sometimes having to sacrifice myself, because sacrifice was part of the family theme. The Joe way is to say yes first, and then figure out how to manage what he's committed to. He would tell himself that his life isn't his own for now, but will be again once everyone else is settled and secure, at my home and in my community. Meanwhile, his wife's silent agreement was, if I keep my eye on Joe and assure myself that he's okay, I won't have to worry whether he's in over his head. But of course, she did begin to worry. And for some time, they just didn't talk about it. They discussed the details of their lives and simply breezed past the impact his overload was having on their marriage, their children, and most of all, his health. Well, Joe was really good at juggling a lot of responsibilities. He liked knowing what the next task was, but he wasn't so good at talking about being overburdened. Really, that wasn't allowed, even to the degree that his obligations negatively affected his health. And so here you go. This is a sample of a vignette. We have many vignettes dispersed that are as powerful as this and that raise, really important questions about role models and the pressure of being one in our communities, about the reception for receiving help and whether one allows that, etc. So I would just say that we know that Joe Martin Henry's example today is one that epitomizes strong pressures in our communities and especially in our minority communities, especially among people of color. And right now, I would again say our hearts are heavy and we are trying to figure out how to get to the next place and hold on to hope. So Nia,
Wow. Yeah, I'm right here. I'm taking it all in. It's funny when you write a book, one like ours that we've been writing over the years, our stories have been with us like friends. And as I listen to them and listen from the time we wrote them to the times we're in, the stories still evolve and the scenario and context always seems to be appropriate, no matter what time we're writing it in. So we hope you find that to be the case when you take a look at our book. If you haven't read it yet, you'll find all kinds of stories about yourself. I'm going to pick a story that is about a family managing their health issues. And I think one of the things about silent agreements that we discovered is there are all kinds of ways that we talk about ourselves and that we look at our health, but some of them are so combined with our traditions that we don't always notice it. We think of it as the way we are. I had a colleague when I was working for a hospital system in Philadelphia, and in the middle of the day, no matter what the deadline was with the CEO, she said, "Oh, I'm Italian. I stop. I think through my belly. We have to eat." And I remember going, "Really? Like, where did that silent agreement come from?" I like it because we, work better when we've had a great meal. But it was the story that she lived with. And I learned so much from that. Actually, I did work better when I ate. So I've been holding on to that tradition and shifting the one I had, which was more like the earlier example. Take care of others first, take care of your job first, and you'll squeeze some food in. So sometimes as you all read, you can see we can swap those narratives. We don't have to always play them out because they've become our friends since childhood. We can start to move into other ones. So I'm going to look at one about health, and this is very interesting because we have some traditions, and I had my hand on it, and then I started looking at others. We have some traditions that come from our family, and one of them is eating. And so this is a story about how silent agreements that are related to your health can show up in all kinds of other coverings around money, around commitment, around all kinds of things, death. But we need to pay attention to them. So let me read a bit out of our book. If you're following with me, it's chapter 8, page 188. Many health-related silent agreements reflect the belief that if we don't talk about it, we won't have to admit our fear that there's a lot about our health that we are either unable or unwilling to control. In this chapter, we address the pitfalls of being silent about our own health and about the health practices of others, the people that live in our homes, the friends that we have, all that we call our network. We sometimes tell people we're fine when we know we're far from it. And in the COVID-19 reality, often we are trying not to cough because we don't want people to ask, "Are you sick?" "No, I have allergies." "Oh, okay. and you try not to move your mask. Rather than admit that we've begun couples therapy, and this is for a couple, we often might tell our friends on Tuesdays we're taking an art class, or if we're having some issues where we have a therapist coming into our home for a family issue, that's just a friend of the family. And what we like to share in this book is we say sometimes we simply become fatigued by all the truth and choose to tell a different health story, one that's easier, one that accommodates the energy that we have or the mood we feel. I want to tell you quickly about the Johnson family. They had a bit of a family fiction that went on so long and so many generations, it started to show up as illness. And that's when we started to name things like childhood obesity. Paula was a parent committed to the health of her family, a family that included a teenage daughter who spent a lot of her free time in the kitchen. Paula grew up in poverty, and even though her family had little to no money, her mother would use extra change to buy flour and sugar and eggs and would try to bake away the family's woes. Giving away delicious homemade treats filled her mother with pride and made her feel generous despite her situation. And her skill at baking was amazing. Her grandmother used to make the best homemade pocketbook rolls. And I don't know if any of you all have those, but I wish I could find the recipe from my grandmother. Now, the family's culinary tradition had been passed on to Paula's daughter, Nia. And over the years, Nia became a proficient baker who proudly shared her creations. And this ability earned her the appreciation and admiration of countless friends and relatives. But it also earned her a lot of pounds. And little did we know, as you continue to read, because she's 16, unlike other teenagers who dashed after school to clubs, Nia rushed to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, she was with her grandmother. And those were precious memories. But behind that was a silent agreement. The family's silent agreement was that even though it jeopardized Nia's well-being, Nia's baking should continue because it had been great for her self-esteem and continued the family's tradition. The agreement rested on the belief that baking is a great bonding mechanism and that Nia was really just big boned, right? Doesn't matter, she's always going to be that size. And Nia had a silent agreement that as long as she kept the Johnson cooking tradition alive, she'd be loved and valued by her family members to make up for what she was missing with her peers. No matter how much teasing she put up with in school, her family was proud of her, so she silently agreed to do her best to ignore the taunts from the girls at school who mocked her. And if you continue reading this story, you'll discover that it ends up being a family silent agreement that just went on for years. Part of what we share when we talk about these wonderful scenarios that you all live and you have your own traditions around is how easily these stories, they stack like pancakes. And if you don't start to take a look at how they're affecting your health and ask, where did that story come from? Grandma said, we're not sick. So when I grew up in my family, there was no pain. You weren't sick. You're too small. You can't have any pain. And I think it was a way of just trying to deal with the fact that you may or may not have had time to take care of it. Or maybe you didn't want that sick mentality. You wanted a healthy mentality. So take a look at the book and see what scenarios you think are really wonderful. Keep in mind in the back of each chapter, we've taken our time to tell you what you need to do going forward and give you some questions to ask yourself so you can explore where your health silent agreements might be.
Thanks for that, Sonia. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the framework that we try to give you for thinking about your silent agreements and actually being able to begin to uncover them. And we talk about 4 stages of change. And the first one involves what we call empathy and trust, and it just values around respect, so that as you embark on attempting to uncover silent agreements with others, whether it's a family member or a coworker, a boss, whomever, that you go in with the understanding that you're going to find ways to do this respectfully. And we talk about that. We talk about setting the stage. We talk about making sure that you have time to have the conversation. We give you conversation starters that kind of set you up so that you can begin to have these important conversations in a way that maintains that trust and respect and allows the other person to kind of meet you and be willing to have the conversation. The next thing that we talk about is important is the examination of history. And that starts with you examining your own history. Like, what am I bringing to this moment with this other person? What are the assumptions and the beliefs and the expectations that I have within this situation? And one of the ways that we encourage people to think about it is to ask yourself, what expectation do you have that's not being met? And also to question whether or not you're kind of looking to and waiting for the other person to kind of bring up whatever it is you're being silent about. And we have all kinds of guidelines, both in each chapter and at the end of the book. We have a whole apprentice of ways and methods. But the focus is on knowing your own history and beginning to be aware of that, and encouraging the person you're talking to also think about and express what they know about their own historical assumptions and beliefs and where they come from. The third area of change really has to do with what you're going to do about it. And we talk about, you have options. You can kind of keep your silent agreements if they're working for you. Some people keep them even when they're not working for them, but they may have their reasons for doing that. But we try to help you to be aware of what the consequences or impact may be of keeping a silent agreement, as well as reframing it. Sometimes people want the agreement, but they don't like all the clauses in the agreement, because often people have an overarching agreement that's similar or the same, but the clauses are different, like who's going to do it or how it's going to play out. Sometimes are different in terms of expectations. So we also talk about the option of using the same agreement generally, but kind of reframing it. And then, of course, you can always toss the agreement altogether and start all over again. And we talk about how you can think about that and discover which is the best option for you. And then finally, we talk about courage and faith, that you can go through this process, that you can engender that in the other person, as well as expect that the other person will also come with courage and faith that you can work this through, typically over time. We're not asking anybody or assuming that anybody's going to do this overnight. And I just want to give you an example of something that I think may apply very much so now in this time of COVID-19, when people are kind of inside, maybe inside with the family that you live with, maybe not, maybe you're inside on your own, or maybe you're inside with someone you didn't expect to be inside with, like an adult child or a cousin who came to visit and is staying. And this is a story of one such situation. Okay, so after relocating to your city to look for a new job, your brother-in-law has moved into your home temporarily. 6 months later, he has no job and shows no signs of trying to find one or move out. Your spouse says nothing about it, but you've had it. You want your home and privacy back, and you expect your husband to tell his brother it's time to go. Your husband doesn't want to ask his brother to leave until he has a solid opportunity in sight, but he admits that his brother has been there longer than expected. So one night you come home tired and wanting to relax, only to find your brother-in-law stretched out in front of the television with snacks, a beer, and his latest love interest. You are furious with him, but even more furious with your husband for not, in your mind, choosing you over his brother. It's time for a serious conversation, and it's important to conduct it so that you and your husband hear each other. And this is where these different stages of change come into play. So your impulse might be to blow up at your husband in the middle of the living room with the beer and the girlfriend and the brother-in-law looking on. But what we encourage you to do is to really take a step back and think about under what circumstances you want to have the conversation and how you want to be heard. And this might be a moment to invite your spouse out for a walk, or to say, let's go have coffee at the diner. I mean, of course, you can't do that during COVID. Maybe it means like retreating to the extra room upstairs where the two of you can sit down quietly and have a conversation. But we also would want this particular couple to think about how they came to this moment. And what we discovered in this example is that both of these people, very well-meaning people with a shared value that family is important, had the same notion that family is important. And because of that, the husband felt he had to help out with his little brother. his younger brother. But his wife, on the other hand, felt if family is really important, then I should come first and my needs should come first. And your brother living in this house and taking over my space is not treating me as if family is important. And once you can use some of the exercises and strategies that we propose, you can find that you can get to that kernel of shared value and shared belief that you both really want to invest in, but you can do it in a way where both feel like their needs are being met, where husband feels like he's supported in caring about his extended family, but where wife feels like she also has that sense of being special and being the primary focus of her husband's notion of family. And these moments sometimes, in the absence of an awareness of the silent agreement, can become long-term contentious situations. And for some people, they may be experiencing that now, maybe not in as extreme a circumstance as a brother-in-law who won't move out, but maybe you're home with an adult kid that you didn't expect to be there, but he's there because it's COVID-19 and, he's there. Or as a friend of mine told me last night, now that she's home and not working as much and cooking a little bit more, suddenly her spouse feels like, oh, you're home, so it's all taken care of. And so they have to reframe their agreement about what it means for her to be home and more available, and what is still expected on his end and what he's expecting on her end. So that's just an example of how we try to help people think through their silent agreements and uncover them for like a better outcome. So did Linda or Sonia, did you want to jump in with another vignette? Or I think we have a few minutes left, or maybe we have time for questions.
Yeah, let's open up for questions, and then that might help us pull a vignette or something that's occurred in our work with the silent agreements. One of the things we do like to share, and you can tell that we like to unpack these silent agreements with people that occur in your workplace, in your family life, and that's our business. Our company is called Sessions Innovations in Psychology, and that's what we do as educators and as psychologists. We work as consultants, and we work in conferences and workshops and synods and the like, to help people organize these courageous, difficult conversations in their lives and work through a series of processes for themselves so that they can change how they communicate and indeed how they show up in the world. So we'll talk about that some more too. Questions?
Cheryl?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, I'm a big fan of the book, and it was good to, every time you hear something, you hear something different. And what I was curious about is what happens when you approach some of the good questions that you set up, and someone has a hugely horrible reaction. I think that's what we're all afraid of, that if we break this silent agreement, is not going to go right. I mean, I had a friend who thought he was a second in command at his job, and when he asked about it, the person said, "No, you're not," and he just quit. He just quit.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, how do you help yourself think through a bad reaction, or and I'm not talking about a typical reaction. I mean, a really surprising reaction.
Nice, nice. Well, I can start and then let's just pass it through. I mean, one of the things we try to do in the book is get you to prepare. This is a process, and Michelle mentioned it early on. It's not the thing that you just go running out the door, or oh my gosh, I've got the perfect question, turn to page 17 with me. It is something that you need to get ready for, because rejection can be a part of it, right? Whatever that narrative is, whatever you thought to your example may not be true at all. And so we are constantly trying to walk through these processes. So we have you prepare. We have you do role play. Sometimes journal out. You could look at, what if this happens? What if that happens? So by the time you get to this conversation, you have the courage to consider that the way you were looking at it was not the case, and that you want to pull back and do some reflective integration with what you hear. So if your go-to is to blow up if it doesn't align with whatever story, narrative, belief, expectation, or value I have about myself is, we'd ask you to put that aside in a nice little suitcase and lock it for a minute and try to go in with this open mind and this consideration that there's more than one solution and more than one option. Talk it out with a friend, role play it with someone who's your coach, call us, we can help you set up an appointment to look at the underlying issues that may cause you to only see the scenario in one way. So preparation would be my short answer to that, Cheryl.
And I think the word courage really set off something for me.
Yeah.
I was going to say that is where the courage and faith comes in. But I think it's something that's really important to point out. And I think we talk about this a lot. Yes, to uncover a silent agreement with another person, the optimal situation is that the other person will want to join you there and will want to uncover it and will want to work with it to come to a better agreement. That's the optimal situation. But we know, human beings who we are, that may not always happen. What we encourage everyone who's reading the book to think about, the notion that you uncover your own silent agreement with yourself is where the first level of value is.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in doing so, what you find out is this agreement that I had with this person, that I was second in command, they didn't have that same agreement. So now what does that mean to me? Rather than, well, he's supposed to adjust and re-agree or change his agreement to agree with me, but more, what does that mean to me that the agreement I thought I had, I no longer have with this person. And this person is not trying to change his agreement about that, not trying to change his stance about that. And that's where the history, what would make you think you're the second when you're operating with someone who clearly thinks something else? How did you come to that place where you thought that? And as Sonia said, with preparation, kind of understanding, like, what if you don't get the answer you want? What's that going to mean to you? Are you going to keep to that agreement? You're going to change it and be unhappy about it? Or are you going to quit? We assume that if you prepared, you might not quit that day. You might try to have another conversation to see what you could work out. But yeah, I think all those elements are important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really, Michele and Sonia, you're so right. And we deal with clients who might want change immediately and on their own terms. And it is frustrating. But I would say that in our chapter 9, our silent agreements toolkit really does focus on getting to know who you are first and what those embedded expectations and beliefs are. And we as a reminder, we provide exercises actually for people to think through and process difficult situation, which is part of the planning scenario that you were talking about, Sonia. Yeah. Any other questions?
Wanda, are you raising your hand?
I'm kind of wondering where do you begin to get two people to work something through to figure out kind of their silent agreements and if they're on the same page or not, and
Some of it, I think, has to do with the language that we propose, that you come in with the notion that we're part of a team that's going to work this out. So the language revolves around, I have noticed that we seem to keep having an issue with such and such, or I am wondering if we could find a time to sit down to figure out how we make this X situation better, so that you approach it in the beginning with the notion that we're a team. It's not your problem, and it's not I'm a problem, and it's not I have a problem with you. It's more, we have been running into something that I would like for us together to see if we can figure it out. And sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do if we're in one is in the practice of pointing out to the other person what they're doing to kind of get on your nerves or, you know, give you a hard time or whatever it is. And I think all of us have been guilty of that at some point and to some degree. But this process really involves engaging the other person around the teamwork and inviting them in. What would work best for you in terms of us having this conversation? We even encourage you ask those kinds of questions. When is a good time for you to sit down with me for us to do it? So there's a lot of kind of entering in with the notion that the other person will be willing to join you if you invite them in as a team member working towards an ultimate goal that will help the partnership, whether it's a personal one, a work one, a family one, or whatever. And that's the mindset that we try to help people with, and we give them conversation starters and how to set the scene, and all of that is in the book.
Thank you. I don't know if there are other questions at all, if anyone else has something for you.
We hope if you take a look at the book, something sparks you. I mean, sometimes it's the stories that we don't even know. This is just who we are, and the narratives are really exciting when we start to think about how we show up in the world. And to the earlier point, it isn't going to happen in one conversation. You know, sometimes it takes a series of chipping away and getting to the fun explorer adventurer part that's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you loved me so much, or I didn't know you were afraid too, or I didn't know that you thought you were second in command and I thought I was second in command. And now we can see maybe it's a systemic issue in the organization and it's not related to the talent we have or the lack thereof. We notice when we serve on our boards, you know, with Rotary Club or the Flower Guild, that we've got this agreement with our volunteer sisters and brothers, and we don't always share it. I order the roses. I'm the one that always orders the poinsettias. And it goes on for years until someone else comes and says, well, I've got a place we can get pink poinsettias. And pink poinsettias, you know, so it's this funny thing that we live with. And it's like humorous when you look at it, because you're thinking, well, okay, like, so why would I not even think about the fact that there's another way to operate in all the work that we do as residents of our lives? So we think it's kind of fun. If you look at the back of the book, some people, I have a girlfriend who calls me from Virginia Beach. She uses it as if it's a guidebook. When she wants to have a conversation with her mate, she'll look up the money chapter and she'll go to the questions in the back and she'll work on it a bit before she thinks about her own silent agreement and the one with the person. So we have an index in the back. When was the last time you got a self-help book with an index? And you can literally go look up the category, you know, like grandma or, you know, whatever it is, cleaning out the attic. No, just joking. We don't have that. But you'll see extramarital affairs, cheating, childhood memories, you know, person-to-person, caregivers, depression, diabetes. I mean, literally everything we talk about, business ventures, false self, how to communicate. So take a look at the back and let it lead you. You might want to bring us on to do some work with you in one of your volunteer organizations.
I want to say another word about what Sonia kind of made reference to was some of the different topics that we talk about in the book. There is a chapter on money. Just to make it clear that we do give a lot of vignettes to just exemplify how you understand a silent agreement and how you uncover it. But we also give you, as she noted with her friend, we give you actual tools that you can use that are in the book, that they're printed in there. We have something in the money chapter called like the money pie, and it asks you these different questions to help you get at your historical expectations around money. What did you hear and think when you were a kid? How did you feel about it as it refers to money? What would you do if you had $1 million and lost it? To try and get you to begin to think through, like, what are you bringing to this money moment? And in addition, and we give all kinds of scenarios around money, you know, to working people who have a different idea of what what financial success looks like. Or maybe you're the one in your family that made it big and everybody else thinks you've got, endless supply of money and are willing to hand it out whenever they ask. Maybe you have a friend that never picks up the tab or her own tab when you go to dinner and kind of looks to you to do that. And her understanding of money and friendship is different from yours. So we give a lot of vignettes, but we also give a lot of kind of mini commentary and actual ways for you to deal with it. And I think one of the things I do want to point out that's at the back of the book is once you go through the various stages and you're asking the question, should I keep this agreement? Should I get rid of it? Should I reframe it? We actually have a chart that helps you think about what happens if I keep it. If I keep it and it matches, then maybe I can go along and it'll be fine. If I keep it and it doesn't match, then I can keep it, but I can be in pain and difficulty. It gives you the different scenarios so that you can really decide for yourself what you want to do about it and how you want to do it. And so I do think that there's a guide, but there's also like there's some catchy ways for you to kind of get at what your silent agreements are and what you want to do about them. And so we hope that you'll look into it from that point of view.
I would say that we're going through a breakthrough moment, period, on so many levels within our family, in our communities, in our society. And this is about breaking through, with ourselves and with others, and understanding clashing mindsets in ways that don't make us fall down, but rather hang in there to really get more courage and have more faith and belief that the difficult communication is possible. It's real. We have many stories. We've seen many successful stories here, and we need all of this right now. So maybe our favorite summer beach reading is not exactly the same as it was last year under different circumstances.
Right.
But I suspect we all want to break through this mess, whether it's the mess that we've created or inherited,
Right.
or has been thrown at us. This is a breakthrough opportunity for all of us to really reflect and make some changes around how we think and the language that we use, and sharing power. How about that?
Love it. That's what silent agreement's all about. Opening up that agreement in your mind and in someone else's mind and getting that restoration from it. How many times do we look at something and we're like, wow, it turned out so much better than I thought? And I know Cheryl's like, when it blows up and it's horrible, but in the polarity of life, you've got that wonderful balance, and we get to help make it. And we are just tickled pink that we can make it with you. And hopefully you can use our book to help you get there.
So please call our Hampton bookstores. We would like to see our book in all of our towns, and we would really appreciate that. And our website is silentagreements.com.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. It's been a great opportunity to talk to the three of you. Does anyone else have any last minute questions? I think we're good then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thrilled
so
Thank you so
much.
much for coming, and thank you so much for having us.
Yes. Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.